Welcome back to Detroit Next. I am Bryce Huffman with Bridge Detroit.
Khary Frazier with Detroit is different.
This is the show where we talk all things Detroit municipal election 2025. We just had the primary last week. It'll be 2 weeks by the time this episode airs. Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about that primary election. That primary election definitely was something that a couple things really stand out. Some of the stuff didn't surprise much.
Right. I think when it comes to the actual results in the mayoral race, Mary Sheffield and Solomon Kinloch are moving on. Most people probably not surprised by those two names rising to the top, although Santil Jenkins, it was pretty close between her and Solomon Kinloch on election night. And if you want more of that in the moment as results are coming in, thoughts from me and Khary, check out the election night live stream that we did. It's up on the YouTube right now. It'll be linked in the comments here. But yeah, I mean, when the results were coming in, I was not shocked to see the names at the top. A little shocked by how dominant of a win it was for Sheffield.
Most definitely, but also looking at the campaign financing that came in before, a lot aligned with that, definitely in that mayoral race. I didn't expect the numbers and the margins to be so vast because the numbers were Mary Sheffield really ahead of the field altogether. The big question mark really that stood is kind of the question mark that always has stood when it comes to these recent municipal elections, and that's that undecided voter and what's happening in reference to that undecided voter. And are these people just still on the fence, or will we expect in the general a lot more people to get to the polls?
I mean, I'm expecting, as we do see from primary to general in, municipal, state, and federal elections, I do expect that we'll get a few more people to come out to vote. But given how wide of a margin of victory it was for Mary Sheffield, maybe that will deter some folks who kind of feel like it's already decided. But nevertheless, I expect that we'll probably see some more voters come out for that one.
And really what came about was looking at the mayor's race early on where you saw the wide margin and what was happening. And it was a tightly race because Santil was there for a long time. Santil Jenkins was in the mix, and that was the question, and many others. But city council now moves right into the front of our minds and what's happening in those city council elections. And that's what we're talking about today on Detroit Next, just me and you.
Yeah, so let me first go through the list of the people that are actually moving on to the general. Obviously, there were some districts like D1, D3, and D4 that did not have a primary, but just talking about the ones that did have a primary. District 2, it's going to be Angela Whitfield Calloway, the current city council member, and Roy McAllister, the previous city council member for that district, squaring off. D5, which was one that we really had our eyes on. Obviously, that is the district that Mary Sheffield currently represents and is obviously leaving vacant because she is running for mayor. And that one's going to be Renata Miller taking on Police Commissioner Willie Burton. That one was the one that I was most interested to see the result of. I didn't know necessarily how District 5 was going to go. And we'll come back to that one as you are now a District 5 resident.
I'm a D5 resident now.
D6 did not have a primary, but D7 did, a seat that Fred Durhall left open when he decided to run for mayor. Denzel McCampbell is going against Karen Whitsett.
And that was a very tight race.
That was probably the tightest race of the night, I would say.
Yeah.
I feel like that race was as tight as the battle for second between Santil Jenkins and Reverend Solomon Kinloch in the mayor's race. But yeah, now we know who's moving on in D7, which is going to be interesting. And then there was the at-large race, which wasn't particularly close. The incumbents, Mary Waters and Coleman Young Jr., they kind of ran away with it. I'm not shocked by that necessarily. And then former council member Janae Ayers came in third, and then James Harris, the fire chief, came in fourth.
Yes. So we can just start with that at-large discussion, I think. So the at-large seat, as we know, very beloved city council members. The city of Detroit used to have nothing but at-large members. So the at-large seat and what is represented in moving forward, we really got to think of the administrations of Mary Waters and Coleman Young the second as well. So Mary Waters moving forward with a whole lot in resident rights. We think about what's happening with actually a commission on behalf of renters. And that is so many discussions moving forward with that. And then Coleman Young. I mean, Coleman Young II is a very beloved city council member throughout community with those relationships. What makes this very interesting is Janae Ayers had that seat before.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting to see someone who, in two of these races, we have someone who lost their seat in the 2021 race going up against the person who replaced them. Or in Janae's case, two people who I guess you could say replaced her to some degree. You have a little bit more memory of when it was all at-large council members. Tell me, do Mary Waters and Coleman kind of resemble what council's makeup was like before we did council by district?
It's so interesting. This goes into the interview I had with James Tate not too long ago, where he was speaking about coming into council with the at-large seat and looking at it throughout the city. And he was saying it's more beloved to be in the district. I'm still a little up in the air. I think that, as I had in that interview on Detroit is Different, and I urge people to check the archives of that interview where you get to hear from James Tate himself talking about it. But at large, I felt that it was more of a pulse where you had a body of all these 9 people that could address whatever was happening throughout the city. And this scope, especially when it came to voting on certain things in districts throughout the whole city, is going beyond that. Right now, in district, we're relying on more so who that council member is and their relationships with the city and the residents over there and the businesses over there. So it's whole different worlds that are being brought to the table based upon where you're from. I was actually more of a fan of at large, I personally think. I think that at large gave more of that idea of what's happening when I think of what the council does. That's the ordinances, the resolutions, and making sure that the purse strings of the city are tight and definitely being looked at. And that's something that Janae is standing on. Janae's like, this is really what I want to monitor. This is what I want to look at. And this is where I want to be. So at large now is really a seat that I think it's two different worlds, even from what is represented. I think that it's great to see Mary Waters and Coleman Young throughout the city in many different districts, because you will see them more often than sometimes you may see your council members, depending upon what district you're in and depending upon what's going on. But those relationships really run deep, and they have poured in through that. So I think the at-large seat now is that extra point of emphasis for a lot of community groups and residents to know that, like, okay, let me get these 3 people, meaning who is in my district and the 2 at-large seats on whatever this issue is. If it were how it was before, where you got the 9, in some ways, I think that some interest as far as like really moving hard agendas forward, and hard agenda issues could be something like what will happen with young people and the curfew, and more so like what funding can be given to recreation centers so that it can be looked at throughout, as opposed to it's like, okay, that rec center is in your neighborhood, what about the rec center in my neighborhood? It kind of becomes a little bit of a versus attitude, and this is just a perspective, not just what I'm saying. This is what some people are actually saying when I interact with them. I'm sure you've heard a little bit of this too.
Yeah, and particularly from some of the older voters, not just in the past election for the primary, but also in the previous election in 2021. I heard a lot of people talking about how there was this idea when they decided to do council by district, which we've had since, 2012, I think, 2012 or 2013. The idea that, an individual council person could take care of their area of the city is what people kind of thought the idea was. And what we really started to see, especially when Duggan introduced district managers, that is kind of the role that a lot of people wanted to see council play when they moved to doing it by district, as opposed to the role that they do play, which is legislation, which is policy, ordinances, the rules around how governing works here.
And you've done, if anybody's catching up and watching, a whole lot of the tutorials and lessons that you're giving on Bridge Detroit. So you need to follow the Bridge Detroit, all of the socials, because you're getting the lessons and you're giving the lessons. And this is a strong mayor city. I don't even think most people have an idea to know the bounds in which what the mayor controls. Even if you check the Detroit Next episode where Ken Cockle Jr. is talking about like, okay, you're stepping into an office where thousands of employees, you're now leading as the CEO of the city. And I think to really empower those districts the right way, the way people look at what city council does, it's going to take some executive action. And what that looks like in this body, I have no idea what that could be.
Yeah, real briefly before we move on through this discussion, just quickly, District 1, James Tate is running unopposed. District 3, it's going to be Scott Benson, the incumbent, taking on Cranstana Anderson. And then D4, Letitia Johnson is also running unopposed.
Yeah. So, Miss Anderson, I was looking up some information. Miss Anderson's coming from a grassroots background, community activism, looking to say that she wants to be more equitable about what can come to the community, especially when it comes to seniors and children. These are things that a lot of people in community do speak to. But Scott Benson has relationships that really tie a lot of that community to some access to business development. Osborne, I believe, is really going to be that stomping ground that you think of like, okay, you have like that proof of concept of those relationships he has there. And definitely Scott Benson's office and the relationship with, well, now the current mayor, but the leaving mayor, but that executive office and Scott Benson's office work hand in hand a lot of times. So that relationship, I think moving forward, that'll be something to keep in mind as there will be a new mayor of the city of Detroit.
Yeah, for the first time in 12 years. Another thing to keep in mind with District 3, and not just District 3, because we're going to get to part of this conversation I know you're interested in talking about, is that we redistricted last year, which means every council district changed just a little bit. District 3 actually moved a little bit further west as far as its where its western boundary is. Now it runs right up to Woodward Avenue, I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
So District 2, my district, actually got a little bit smaller in that area of the district. And now you are not in District 2, you're in District 5.
Yes.
So tell me about that change. For people that are in parts of the city where their district did change, what should they know going into the election? What should they know about just advocating for themselves in general?
Oh, man. So first, do you all remember the mapping and the district votes of the maps? Oh, that was a process. And when I was in District 2, it was Councilmember Calloway that held a series of different community outreaches about like what's going to happen with this district, and uplifted from the Hope Village Revitalization Board, which I'm a part of, and that's the Community Development Corporation over here in my neighborhood. They were saying like in District 5, how will we compete with everything happening downtown? Now it's like everything downtown, what's happening in Indian Village and other parts of the east side, also Midtown. It covers such a large footprint. Really, D5 is citywide, but not citywide.
Right. I would say that if I were to look at kind of a map of the city, D5 just sits right in the middle. It borders up against Hamtramck and Highland Park. It goes all the way to Belle Isle in the Marina District. Basically, everything over from there to this section of the city here, that's a big swath of land. And now that that seat is going to be open to someone who is not Mary Sheffield for the first time in 12 years, it's going to be really interesting to see how some of the conversations change about priorities for the district. Obviously, lots of Detroiters, not just at our candidate forums, but just from talking to people out in the community, you know, there's this idea that they want to see less money going to downtown and Midtown, more into the neighborhoods. Whether it's Renata Miller or Willie Burton, whoever wins that district, that's going to be interesting to see how they navigate just struggling over how they get resources to different parts of their district.
And also, two definitely candidates that are involved and active in community. Miller from the background of being in community with Indian Village and being the first Black person, you know, not just Black woman in that role, but and also welcoming in more leadership about that. And then what's looked at to preserve what does exist in those communities, fighting against the flooding and what's being faced there. Burton is a police commissioner, one of the police commissioners that has fought staunchly to get the body cameras that Still, it seems to be about like when we have access to the video connected to those body
Right.
cameras and what happens with it. But still, step one in Burton's fight's there. And these relationships that you have two people in community that are seeing community looking for this seat. And now that seat looks like a launch pad to be mayor, or our next mayor possibly. That is going to have a lot of eyes on D5.
Yeah.
And we still have a lot of questions about what's happening with downtown development. Downtown development seems to be one of the biggest topics there is. And we talk about D5 now, that's also the riverfront. So these communities, these neighborhoods, it's Mack Ave and it's Dexter Boulevard. This is an interesting district when you really think about the way that it stretches, how will it interact with the people to be engaged, because I know that sitting in some of those conversations about district, a lot of people were saying like, please don't have us in 5 because we're going to be so much of a corporate interest versus community interest, which kind of is a discussion that's been coming up in a lot of these races,
Right.
but that's more forefront in D5. I think that both candidates will be pounding that pavement, reaching out to communities that they have. And I also am very interested to see what will the corporate interests look at both these candidates, because both candidates really have a community lens in where they're campaigning and their backgrounds. And that's not necessarily that corporate lens.
Right. And I mean, for Willie Burton's side, I mean, I covered these Board of Police Commissioner meetings for years, and he was usually one of the few, if only, taking the side against DPD, taking the side of, hey, maybe we don't need more surveillance technology. Maybe we don't need to invest in this new thing that has been shown to be harmful to Black people across the country. So just having that lens going into a district that, encompasses a lot of corporate money, a lot of people that wanted things like facial recognition and Project Greenlight and ShotSpotter. It's going to be interesting to see how he navigates conversations with voters as he's trying to get their support.
Yeah, and it's also communities that really have lifted up and spoke so much about being and feeling neglected. That discussion, and also the new Hudson site. So this is what's happening in D5.
Yeah, in D6, a race that didn't have a primary again, but it's got two people going against each other, Gabriela Santiago Romero and State Rep Tyrone Carter. What do you think of that race? I mean, we got a chance to see both of them up close, answering pretty difficult questions and answering community questions. Both pretty much showed that they are competent to lead in city council. Gabriela, being the incumbent, obviously had a bit of a leg up on some of the specifics of what she would like to do or initiatives she wants to continue or alter. But both of them showed that, hey, they know what they're talking about. They know people in the district. What do you think of that race?
Well, first, Gabriela comes from that background when we think of organizing and activism and advocacy. In Southwest, very beloved. Always staunch and standing with the residents on so many different points. So I think that lens, looking at Tyrone Carter, police officer, Tyrone is coming from that lens of also a state representative, of looking at what can happen in, I would say, more of a conservative traditional lens in this scope, and very different types of candidates.
Very different.
And different relationships within that district, too. To the point where you would say to yourself, like, the options here couldn't be a lot more polarizing.
Yeah, I think for, if we're talking about District 5 having two people coming from a community lens, District 6 and District 7, where we have Denzel McCampbell going against Karen Whitsett, those are the two races, I think, that are a little bit more battles of philosophy politically. Denzel, again, coming from a strong organizing background, coming from someone who has actually run for office before in Detroit, he ran for clerk in 2021 against Janice Winfrey. So he really comes from an organizing, kind of raising community consciousness approach to things. Karen Whitsett, I haven't actually got the chance to meet her in person. What do you know about Karen?
Oh, man. So Karen's Whitsett is a person that, when it comes to like moving forward in that lens of how they're going to organize and being in that community, building those old school relationships. And I want to say kind of a little bit of that old school approach. Definitely in the state house, people know that she would not bite her tongue as far as letting things be known about how to move forward the agenda, and also not necessarily going to be one to say that, okay, just because everybody else is doing it, I'm going to stand over here. So we look at the lens of this more so of how can we build upon, I think more so, the progress that has been given to people. And then you look at another lens as like people need access to what's happening. Those are the lenses I see. And D7 is also very industrial. So
Very.
Fred Durrell is welcomed in a little bit more of that industry. And Denzel having so many of those relationships, especially in water advocacy of environmental justice, that's going to be one of the things that I definitely think will be looked at and paid attention to. And Karen more so from a lens of like, okay, let's get some jobs and let's get people to work. That's more of the lens of like that development and that growth we need to bring over to this district. Kind of carrying a little bit of the baton that a Fred Durhal laid down in certain pieces, not all aspects, but in certain pieces. I think that's what we're looking at in the difference of what's happening in D7.
All right. And then quickly back to the at-large race real quick before we move on to a conversation about voter turnout, which I know many people get fired up about. But when we talk about the at-large race and the potential makeup of a new city council, it looks like we're probably going to have those two incumbents back in, or we're going to have a former council member who has already served in that seat back in. What are some of the opportunities you see for people who get to like take a citywide lens to work with the individual council districts? What kind of opportunities do you think there are, knowing that they do get to go from meeting to meeting and community to community a little bit more broadly than some of the other council members?
Well, first off, for James Harris, it's a little bit different because we haven't seen that work in action. With Janae Ayers, you know, the relationships, especially with the recreation centers and looking at the Recs department and also saying like, okay, we need to pay attention so much to the budgeting. Mary Waters, like really leaning into what's going to happen with residency, and not just residency, but a lot within housing. And that's also one of those arcs of Coleman Young too. So I'm looking at what's going to happen with this at-large seat from the lens of like more so the sensibilities of where they stand with where they have those relationships, and still being open to a new year, but those relationships and what will be built upon. Coleman Young and Mary Waters already have initiatives that they're pushing forward and want to see being brought to life. But this is more so that Khary thought process. That at-large seat is also going to be one of those seats that really will be looked at to take, I don't want to say a role of leadership, but other voices in what's going to happen as we see a lot of this ARPA programming stop and halt. Because one thing definitely is for sure, as much as the mayor's office does have the district managers and so many different ways of touch and base and point in community, I mean, even all of the departments, city council's dealing with it head on. When something happens in the community, as James Tate even said, or Brenda Jones definitely will share with you, anytime you get a chance or you can ask her, they're looking to talk to their council member, especially by district, of this is what happened and this is how it happened and I want this changed and that's where we need to go from. So I think the at-large seat can look to possibly give a little bit more perspective and support to those members that are in those districts, to give a little bit more of that context, that political education, and really be present for how the residents are bracing themselves for what will look different in the city, as a lot of the programming and some of the jobs won't be present anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's something that I have been asking candidates about for months now. We're not going to have these ARPA funds. We have a very different type of president in the White House now than we had
that right.
during most of Biden's administration. or during the Biden administration. So what is that going to mean for people in communities? That's the question I've been posing to a lot of people. Many of the council candidates have answered it kind of the same way. There are certain things we know that are in our control, and that's what we're going to focus on. As far as the relationship with Washington, we're really going to have to rely on our relationship with Lansing a little bit better to kind of fill some of those gaps.
And I'm sure that that's where Tyrone Carter is going to speak up and say, like, hey, I just left Lansing. And in that same balance with what happened with that session with Joe Tate, that at one point in time was a mayoral candidate, then a senator candidate. But
right.
man, a lot of people feel as though what was at stake with Democratic control really relying in this being such a blue city, a Democrat city, and a lot of Detroit didn't feel that relationship with Lansing poured back into the city. So I think Karen and Tyrone, in some ways, will use that as a way to say, like, look, I have those relationships with Lansing, but on this campaign trail in D7 and D6, we're going to see some fireworks possibly at some forums as far as what to be learned of relationships in Lansing and what can be relied upon with relationships in Lansing.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the mayoral race, Fred Durhal was the candidate that I think really talked about his relationship with Lansing the most. And we see that it didn't necessarily fare too well for him. I don't know if that necessarily means Detroiters are just not thinking about Lansing or how we can leverage our relationships in Lansing, or if maybe there were other causes that didn't really get him to rise to the top of the race. But that was one of the few election day surprises for me, was just where some of those candidates that were not in the top three finished.
I agree. And anybody that follows any of this knows that Lansing matters so much because the city of Detroit is chartered through Michigan. So that relationship to Michigan, the same way that your city council member has to have a great relationship with the mayor's office to move forward what's happening for your district, your city council member and our mayor have to have a great relationship with Lansing to move forward these agendas, especially looking at what's happening federally. So it may be one of those things that we're learning more so in the scope after the fact than what's happening present, but this is going to be very important.
Yeah, I'm excited to see in the general if we can maybe get more voter turnout. This is where I want to direct the conversation.
I got you.
What are the candidates need to be doing to get some of these people that decided not to vote engaged or involved? What do they need to be doing differently?
Okay, now you know what they say always sometimes. Life ain't fair. That's a phrase that just always exists. So some of the shadows of the apathy that exists in Detroit is part of the shadows of the apathy that existed after what happened federally with the last presidential election. So the vestiges of that still exist. And I think that when we really look at a lot of the local municipal elections recently throughout the Duggan era, it was a lot of apathy and low voter turnout already. But people are kind of checked out as far as some of the people I talk to as what will voting do for them. This is a discussion that a lot of people say that we shouldn't be talking about it. We shouldn't have it, but 16% voter turnout in this city. And right now you have such an opportunity to vote throughout the state. It becomes tough. Even, I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit with the gubernatorial discussion, but a story that ran this past weekend about what's happening with Jocelyn Benson's office and racial discrimination. And then you're like, okay, but is this the person at the state level that has the relationship with elections? What's happening there? So all of this is only fuel to the fire of a lot of people that have checked out, that feel as though that the political structures are not acting in the best interest of residents and people in community. And it's tough. This is something that Mayor Duggan has spoke to and says, like, no, we've been just as much in community as we've been downtown. And I've done all these examples of what we've done in community, but people aren't feeling it. People are looking throughout their neighborhoods and they feel as though what they're seeing downtown versus what they see in their community, that's not lining up and that's not aligning. And furthermore, what Detroit is today that exists in this quote unquote new Detroit is not necessarily what has been given opportunity to a lot of people that feel like they were part of, I guess, old Detroit or legacy Detroit. So all of this plays a role in getting people to vote because the other thing is a lot of people, especially from the mayoral race, I don't think any candidate came out and just explicitly said, look, I'm going to do things differently than the Duggan administration.
Yeah, we didn't quite see that. I mean, the most vocally separate argument that we got was probably either Joel Hashim or Donetta Simpson. Those were the two that really made it a point to say, hey, we are different. We will do things different. Donetta, maybe not with so many details. With Hashim, it was really about just the way that the city thinks about financial resources and how we can maneuver those in the best interest of Detroiters. But aside from that, most of the candidates were really careful to tiptoe around saying too many negative things about the way Duggan has run the city. Part of that, I'm sure, because they look at what he inherited and what we have now, but also they know he is running for governor. And, at some point, if he does win that race, if you said too many bad things, it might not bode well for the city.
It may not. It may not. The reality is, if you say that basically I'm going to keep adding to what does exist and people have already checked out because they feel as though they aren't checked into what's come to the city, I mean, it's like, 2 + 2 = 4.
Right.
So it's going to take something a lot different. It's going to take a different voice, a different approach, saying that, okay, this works from this perspective and this angle, but I have something new to offer. Let's try these ideas. Let's try these concepts. Let's introduce this. Let's move forward on these agendas. And then I think you are going to get other people to get out and say, like, okay, I can vote for that. But if the premise is more so the same, I don't know how much that's going to bring out the person that wasn't already really checked in.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I hear a lot of candidates say is they want to continue, and they use the T word, the trajectory of what the Duggan administration has done. But I think unless you really think about what that trajectory has been, just ensuring that we have consistent city services, trying to improve service times for things like the bus system, things that he has tried to do and has vocally spoken about, but haven't quite materialized. I think that's kind of where that disconnect is coming from. That, and once Detroit entered bankruptcy, people saw that no matter how I vote, at any moment the state can come in and do whatever they want to our resources and our assets.
So emergency management really has been a dark cloud over so much voter engagement for maybe the past 20 years. I mean, this is going back to when I was leaving high school, David Adamany in the school, keep the vote, no takeover. So like this aura of, and I'm going to speak it, Black self-determination being redirected into what becomes administrative, quote unquote, how things need to be done. It's left a lot of people disillusioned with how this whole political process is. So seeing that in the schools and seeing that in the city, and really, as my late godmother, Joanne Watson, said, that was an unfair bankruptcy as far as many people are concerned, and I'm part of those many people, when the debt that the state owes the city of Detroit, that almost every candidate stands on record as saying, like, that's nothing to pursue, and that's too far-fetched, but it's just so tough because of the way that the state held so much pressure on the city of Detroit and the city of Detroit public schools. And it's so tough because this same leverage of the state of Michigan needs the city of Detroit. As I always say, it's like you take Detroit from Michigan. Michigan is like I don't know, Wyoming or Dakota or something like that. Like, you need the city of Detroit. Detroit's culture, Detroit's artistry, Detroit's ingenuity, Detroit's gateway to what's happening in Canada. International Crossing is really going to be the engine of what moves forward so much of the state of Michigan. And that also becomes so much pressure even when we think of what happens in Lansing, because it becomes really, the Tommy Walker theme, like a Detroit versus everybody, so many places. And a lot of Detroiters do have a feeling right now that it's like, okay, I'm in my own city, and it's like me versus my own city in some ways when it comes to political administrations, what's happening, my neighborhood, even the challenge of affordable housing that is a national challenge. And the
Right.
solutions given versus the poverty that exists and is so pertinent throughout the city of Detroit, I don't know if what we're calling affordable housing is even something that should be even used in the same sentence or paragraph of what's affordable for the average resident here.
Right. I mean, and I think many of the candidates, mayoral and city council, pointed it out in forums and in interviews. The AMI discussion, the area median income being something that includes Livonia and Warren automatically puts Detroiters at a disadvantage when that is the definition being used for affordable housing projects. So that right there is already something that Detroiters have been saying and have been seeing. Luckily, we do have candidates that are calling that for what it is. Because
Yes.
people, when you're in Detroit and you point out things and you know what's going on, sometimes you can feel a little crazy talking about this stuff.
I agree. And that's step one, but it needs to be solutions to what that is to solve. So step one is definitely calling it out. The other thing, and it's very tragic, but so much about what's happening like almost all summer. You turn on the news, you're hearing about another shooting, another shooting, another shooting, another shooting, another shooting, another shooting. It was recent. I saw a comedian not too long ago that was just in town, and he was like, "Man, I turn on the TV and I see the police commissioner crying to the people." And it's like, though the statistics have crime going down, the reflection of all of the imagery and what's happening is not what's happening in the city. So that is also a big discussion to a lot of residents. I personally live in a community that a lot of people may say, okay, this ain't the safest one, but I feel very safe here. I think that there are opportunities. I feel like we do have community, but everyone doesn't feel the way that I feel about being in Detroit, especially with what's reflected. And some of this is like what opportunities exist. So I am hopeful that council and the mayor can be very innovative in ways to usher in new opportunities for a lot of the Detroiters that are looking for those opportunities, and not just from the lens of jobs, but also small business and entrepreneurship.
All right. And before we close out, I just want to get final thought from you. With all these city council races that we do have, what is something that you want to hear more from the candidates that we didn't really get much of in the primary?
Okay, so now that it's like really like that one-on-one, it's going to be, I want to hear about some of the assets that Detroit has, keeping those assets, because even GLEWA and what's happening with the water, that's another one of those entities that got a lot of ARPA funding. What's going to happen moving forward with Detroit Water? That's been one of the biggest topics for forever, and it will always be a topic. So Detroit Water, that's going to be very key. I think that. And then property taxes. We need to have some strong solutions for that. Mary Sheffield spoke to it a lot. Also, Attorney Perkins spoke to it, but property tax reform, as some people feel as though it's still some questions that currently exist, but we know also what did exist. So really resolving that matter so that it doesn't become like the debt that the state of Michigan owed the city of Detroit as time goes on, because the overassessed property taxes have changed a lot of the communities that we live in.
Yeah, I mean, communities have just been emptied out by tax foreclosures, which reminds me, when we're talking about property tax justice in the city, all of the mayoral candidates have been asked about it in one point or another. Was there anyone that gave an answer that like really stuck out to you as, okay, this person has some details? Because that's what people have been wanting. You've heard us say it on the podcast several times. People want details for their plans. Have you heard anyone come out with details about how they can address this? Anyone who's still in the race, that is?
Oh, I believe that Mary Sheffield on the Detroit Next episode, she spoke to the initiatives that she's already begun setting that seat. And that also is where an incumbent has an advantage over others to say that this is the work that I have done from a legislative position as an executive to expand upon what could be empowered for that. I believe she spoke to that in the most detail from that Detroit Next episode. So check the archives here. And she leaned into that one and really was on top of Malachi a little bit more than I was expecting in reference to that. Now, what that looks like moving forward and how far it could go, it's like, okay, this is where I can take it in legislation. imagine where we could go from executive. That's how I interpret it.
Yeah, same here. I didn't really get too many details from Solomon Kinloch on property taxes, but there's still time. Hopefully, we will hear more from him at some of these community forums. Over the summer, he didn't really participate in too many of the more widely publicized ones. He was at Mackinac. We spoke to him there. Check out our interview with him at the Mackinac Policy Conference. We also saw him at the WDIV mayoral debate. But aside from that, we didn't really get an opportunity to hear as many details about some of those really important issues you broke down. So now that he is in the final two, maybe we'll hear a little bit more of that from him.
Yeah, I think water, land bank, public safety, and sometimes I think this is one of those things that it's like, okay, that's not even interconnected, but I got to bring it up. People talk about schools and that relationship that the city will have with schools. And I believe that Sontil Jenkins had the most expansive plan in reference to like what that relationship could be. But all those issues really, not just for council, not just for the mayoral seat, but also in council. Those are going to be things talked about just citywide.
Right. Yeah. And we're going to hear people talk about those in all of these discussions coming up. So stay tuned with us on Detroit Next. We're not going anywhere. We'll be here even after the election is over to give you kind of a breakdown of what we can expect from the new administration and the new makeup of city council.
All right. With that being said, we'll see you later. And this is another Detroit Next, but we got to get that full rundown now of making sure you like, subscribe, and stay tuned to Detroit Next. It's going to be a lot more in dynamic content coming up with Detroit Next as we move forward. So you're going to see some roundtable discussions if you had a chance to check out that roundtable discussion. And also, it was like more so Detroit Next family. We did that election night primary live stream, but for the general, that's going to be something special and sweet, but you can give the more formal information.
Yeah, this is Detroit Next. This is a community-led effort, so we want to hear from you. We couldn't do this show without the input of community members all across the city, and we want to hear from you. We have a Google Voice number set up. That number is 313-284-6407. We haven't really gotten too many voicemails that kind of fit the requirements, so I'll lay those out again real quick. We want to hear your name, where in the city you are from, and then a brief 30-second to 1 minute long voicemail. We've gotten a few that are a little bit longer, some that are a bit too profanity-laden to play on this show, but we do appreciate the feedback. We do appreciate the sentiments that people have shared. So yes, make sure to leave us a message. Again, that number is 313-284-6407. And again, I'm Bryce Huffman with Bridge Detroit.
Khary Frazier, Detroit is different.
You can find us online at BridgeDetroit.com or DetroitisDifferent.com. And of course, follow us on social media. We're always putting content out there on the Detroit Next Pod Instagram, which is just at Detroit Next Pod, or the Bridge Detroit Instagram at Bridge Detroit. Detroit is Different is always putting out cool content as well. Yeah. So make sure to follow them. Hit us up on our YouTube page as well. We're always publishing videos and clips from our full interviews and episodes. So stick with us. We'll be back.
Peace.
Detroit Next is a community-led project from Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different, which means that we cannot do this work without you. We need your support. If you have a question or comment and want to be participating in this process throughout the year, give us a call. We have a phone line set up at 313-284-6407. Leave us a message. We will play these messages on the podcast, so just be cognizant of that. And if you like what we're doing, head to BridgeDetroit.com, subscribe to our newsletters. All of that content, again, is free. No paywalls for anybody. We're trying to make it as accessible as possible. Head to our YouTube channel to get full episodes and interviews and extra content throughout the year. You can also find the audio version of this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and DetroitNext.podbean.com. We are going to be doing this all year long, so stay with us. Follow BridgeDetroit.com and Detroit is Different on your favorite social media platforms, and take this ride with us.